Okay, so not too long ago, there was a report focusing on the importance of creating sponge cities to mitigate the problem of pluvial flooding was published. I guess it'd just be
Yeah,
good to have a bit of background as to the sort of who, why, when of the report. Yeah, give us some
yeah,
detail if you can.
yeah. I mean, the why is really easy to tell you, Philip, and it's very personal to be really open and honest with you. So I live just outside of North Oxfordshire, or in North Oxfordshire, just outside of Oxford, and the back of my garden, running through middle to a sort of 3/4 away from the house, I have a sub. And I've been living in the house 15 years. It's been absolutely fine. You know, when the dry season's there, it's just a dry bed, and when it rains, it has a nice trickle in it. But as of Christmas last year, just before about October, November, this time last year, we had that massive downpour of rain, and this 4 foot sud all of a sudden became full, and the water started to creep up the garden, and thankfully didn't go into my house, but next door got hit. So all of a sudden they were under 2 foot of water. There's a difference of level in the houses. I became very interested in what suds are for, about how they're regulated, when they're putting into a project, and how they're maintained and looked after. And that's when I obviously, because I'm international foreman chair of British Water, I was looking and seeking advice on, what can I do? How can I protect my own property? A very selfish point of view, I would like to say. And that's where I met the team over at Aqua. And they said, well, this is what we do. So we thought about it and said, okay, there's a paper in this. So we actually got full support from British Water to do it, and actually went into producing the paper. And that's what sort of that I didn't realize how big the impact was from it. I think we're talking about communities' infrastructure can be devastated quite heavily. I think it was about 4.6 million UK properties alone are at risk. There is obviously potential fatalities and failures as well. And that's when we started looking at what had happened to Copenhagen, London, New York, and a number of other cities. We started to dive in and see where it came from. So the starting seed was from a very personal position of what suds are all about, and I came very much interested in the topic.
Okay, and I guess it would be good to understand because it's about creating sponge cities, I think. So
Yeah.
how do you what is a sponge city? How do they work?
So basically, it's very much as it sounds. That you've seen, and I'm sat here, and you can obviously see the view of London. It's basically being able to absorb, and we saw the flooding and in London when it happened, and that sort of images of water trickling, down staircases in subways, and the sort of that ankle deep, knee deep in parts. So basically, what a sponge city is the ability to absorb, hold, and place water in a safe place, a safe location that then in time can be able to drain away, so to speak. So that is a very layman sort of term on what a sponge city is. And that's where suds and everything else comes in. It's that using green spaces usually to make them a dual focus, not only the benefit of being a green space from a mental and physical point of view, but the ability to absorb that water where and how it's required.
Okay, and in
There's also
terms
big
of
ben-
sorry.
oh, sorry, I was just going to say there's other big benefits to that, air quality, urban biodiversity, blah blah blah, so stuff like. Sorry, I cut across you. You were going to ask?
No. I was just going to say, and the reason they're sort of it's becoming such an important topic is because there is, I mean, you mentioned there's 4+ million homes that are potentially vulnerable, but there is a general acknowledgement that there's an increased risk in terms of the regularity and the cost of this pluvial flooding, and presumably with climate change, this is only going to get worse. Is that right?
Well, you look, I mean, it's not, I know we're going to predominantly talk about the UK, but you look, it's not just the UK. When you have these sort of storms that are becoming more and more regular. Cities, because of their nature and because of the makeup of city being made of hard surfaces, are going to have this sort of consideration very much at the forefront of the mind, because yes, it might be 1 in 10 years, but that devastation that comes, the three houses that were flooded in my village, on the back of it, some of them, it took 6 to 9 months for them to get back into that property. Now I'm in a very rural village. You put that implication into Paris, London, New York, any of those cities which are main not only employment hubs but living spaces as well, that is then having a major effect on a general population.
Again, I think the report states that sponge cities are potentially the only way to address the impact of this pluvial flooding. And I guess in practical terms, that means that you've already mentioned SUDs. So SUDs are pretty much what's required for these sponge cities to come about. Is that right?
It's not the only way, but it's a very good way. You obviously have swales, and what you can do is you can bring a spider's web of opportunities and outcomes to the problems, to solve the problems. So, but it is one that unfortunately seems at times to be thought of last minute and brought in last minute. For me, that SUD, especially on new housing estates, if they are susceptible to flooding, and we have all that data now, we're very enriched in data and where those issues are, that should be one of the first things that hits the drawing board. The design and the layout of the estate, if we use a word for it, needs to be designed around the management of water and how it can be put into a safe space situation so people and property aren't affected. So yes, they are one of the main players, but you can put them in with a mixture of other opportunities to protect those assets.
Okay, and if I understand correctly, SUDS covers a sort of multitude, I won't say of sins because they're good things, but many different sort of approaches
Yeah.
that will come under SUDS. So perhaps you can give us an idea of that. And also to your point there, you mentioned obviously when it comes to new build, but how easy is it to sort of retrofit SUDS or find places to install SUDS in any existing landscape as well, if that's...
Yeah, I mean, as you said, they're very diverse and very adaptable, and that's the main thing. They are very adaptable. I think the one, going back to the report, the one that really stood out for me was Copenhagen and the playground. You didn't look, the traditional way of basins and bioswales and rain gardens and all that. You sometimes have a mental picture of what you're going to see. When we were talking with Rambold and talking to the client on this project, it was a playground. And it didn't look like the traditional way of doing it. And that then you add in things like the permeable paving, you had green roofs and this. So this is a whole plethora of opportunities to actually solve the problem. As I said, that spider's web of SUDs can come together to solve it quite nicely. And then, cloud-burst management is got to be a key. Was a key plan for Copenhagen, I know, and we saw those, unfortunately, that loss of life in Dubai when they had the cloudburst there and the flooding there. So I think, that management and having that sort of setup ready and willing to do is a key for any sort of future city planning and future expansion. And that really comes into focus with some of the new cities we're talking about, or the extension to existing cities. We really have to get in there early.
Okay, and in order for this sort of momentum to increase, I guess all the water industry stakeholders, and it's quite a complicated, I suppose, supply chain or ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, they need to
Yeah.
understand how to improve SUDS delivery. So any thoughts as to sort of yeah, how difficult that is to effect this, what's required.
Yeah, I mean, as you saw, we got some very good sponsorship from the government. That report, they actually on our behalf submitted the report, so that was quite nice. We didn't need to do it ourselves, and there were some really nice sort of comments around it, around the reason why the report stood out for the team in question, why we got so much support. It not only discussed the problem, it actually gave the outcome as well, or advice on the outcome, not the final outcome, but set a wheel in motion and direction. So yeah, I mean, that's where, you know, personally myself and Aqua were open to do. You know, we can give advice, we can give sort of leadership to those solutions for people to understand. You know, not going to prescribe the solution ourselves, but we can get people thinking about how to deal with and how to bring in maybe new ideas and great working examples globally. You know, so there is plenty of educational material out there. We just need that sort of level of mindset from within inside the asset owner that this is now a priority for them to deal with and make it an early conversation on any project.
Yeah, and I guess, are you optimistic that that can happen? Because I mean, SUDS, I've been involved, I expect you've been involved in the industry quite a long time, and SUDS is not a new concept, but for some reason it never quite gets to where it needs to be. Do you think this time, or are you hoping this time it'll be a bit different?
I'm hoping it's more of a, you know, you look at some of the bylaws about keeping hedges and suds clean in rural areas. So that's where, you know, they've been heavily used in the past around the farmers' fields and stuff. But this is where I think the action or the reaction to the action, as we see wetter days, or no longer sort of not the number, but the actual. That's what I'm thinking of. The density and the actual amount of rain that now falls is becoming more effective, and more of an issue that people are start to see that knowledge rise and people thinking about it more and more. So I'm hoping it's the catalyst to start the ball rolling, that we are starting to see this happen and be involved a lot more.
And in terms of some of the other recommended measures to prevent the pluvial flooding, there's a list of those. I think you talk about increasing pace and scale of remediation.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll list them if that's all right, and then you can talk.
Yeah.
Launch Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act, working with communities, and then I think integrate water management plans. So please talk a bit about the, you know, all.
Okay, so let's start at the front end, so Schedule 3. So that, I mean, that public consultation needs to be really important on Schedule 3, and that ensures the framework for the drainage. You know, what's really interesting is now people are taking a lot more notice of what's going on locally. You know, and there's also that external impact as well. You know, you're seeing solar farms and those solar panels coming on. What people don't realise is the issue they create. So you've got what was a large expansive field, for example, that basically created a natural soak or natural sponge, and then it's soaked away. You're now covering that with hard surfaces. Now, what people don't realise, that hard surfaces has a drip tray on it. So when the water hits, it hits a tray, and then it's funneled. So all of a sudden you have a large expanse of water, or a large expanse of hard surface, the water hitting it, being collected, and then being driven away. So now there becomes some sort of force in that water. So some people on that consultation haven't realised that, and are now starting to pay attention to that, because that can increase the possibility of flooding in a particular area because of the density and not the natural soak. So going very much that sort of section 3 in the public consultation is really, really important. So that's definite one. I'm trying to think now off the top of my head of some really good examples. You know, the Severn Trent Mansfield catchment, that really good. I mean, that's there's a great blueprint for how water companies can lead a fast pace and large scale SUD rollouts there, and that really did sort of accelerate the necessary CSO overflows. So it is there, and that learning and that movement and momentum really does work well.
Yeah, and in terms of the way forward, I mean, do we require the government to sort of dictate the strategy and then everyone else underneath to sort of follow it through? Or how, I suppose, how can these recommendations become, real life strategy, I guess is the question. Yeah.
I mean, there is definitely a need for a national framework that empowers the water companies to lead on catchment areas, and that sort of unlocks the large-scale SUDs and mandates the Schedule 3 we've just talked about, and that's what really leads to implementation. That's where it really needs. These frameworks should really bring a level of collaboration from landowner. And it's not just the water companies area you're now looking at. You're looking at, especially in rural areas, other contributing factors. So getting that level of collaboration really is, and really incentivize green development. We're seeing green development in a way, and there's a very tenuous link here. New estates should have solar panels on the roofs. I don't disagree with that, but also they should have that management again. So yes, we're having a mandate or a request for the solar panels on the roofs for the electricity issue. Let's have that similar sort of mindset and leadership around the water issue. So, let's get that really going. But that comes from collaboration, and I think as insurance companies are becoming more wary of the topic and they've got more access to that data, I think householders will become more informed what to look for and what to ask for, because they're going to be paying for it through the insurance. So when someone is moving to a new estate, those questions I think are going to come up as well more often. So the developer is going to have to be a little bit more prepared and focused on giving the correct answers and, more importantly, the correct solutions.
And I suppose the sort of final question would be: Are you bearing in mind what has gone before? Are you optimistic that some serious progress can be made or will be made, or do you worry that there are just too many sort of obstacles, interested parties that, I mean, I'm not necessarily hammering the building, the building house construction, but they always seem to find a reason why not to do sort of environmental things rather than embracing it. And I'm sure there are other, people. So do you think there will be a coming together, or do you just worry that the people will kind of raise?
No, I think in this time and age, to answer your question, yes, I am optimistic. I wouldn't be in the job that I'm in if I wasn't an optimistic person, and I have seen change. The dad joke that I use on a number of presentations, I was very much part of Crossrail, and I started Crossrail on a Nokia 6210 because the iPhone had only just arrived and the iPad, and I've seen that massive change from a paper heavy site to paperless sites and move forward. So as a race, we can change. So I am very optimistic we'll change. There's also now more and more projects coming to surface that are what I call lighthouse leadership projects. Copenhagen, as we mentioned earlier, about what they did. So the more those lighthouse projects are talked about, the more those lighthouse projects are referenced, I think that's what will drive the catalyst. And I think also the possible white knight in the corner, they're not often called the white knight, is finance. As finance invests in assets, whether they be an infrastructure asset or invest in a developer who is developing an estate, I think finance will have that, because they are so risk averse. They'll have that sort of drive around management. And I was with a fantastic investor yesterday, an infrastructure investor, and they only invest in 25-year cycles, where some invest in 5-year cycles, and that has a different connotation. And they are very much involved in the design, the pre-design, the design, the delivery, and the operations. And therefore, key things like flooding are on their mind. And we're talking about data and sort of 4D, 5D simulation of particular issues. So if that's on the finance person's mind, that will become a very strong driver of acceptance and also requirement and requests as well.
Okay, I mean, it's been fantastic to chat, and thank you so much for sharing some great
Absolute
insight
pleasure.
on what's going on in this area. Appreciate your time. Thank you, Mark.
Anytime.